Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Today, in this continuation of my Ranch Porch Series of videos that are about topics that aren't directly related to Old Norse or relate to my opinions about things, I'm going to talk about how to be a good learner. I almost said how to be a good student, but since I'm a university instructor, I think that some people would take that to be guidelines for the classroom, which is not really what I'm after here. I think that the classroom, at least as our current university system works, is actually not the place where people really learn, right? Typically, we're taking a class because we need a particular credit, a particular credential. We memorize some facts, we pass some tests, we go on with our lives. I'm talking about when you really want to learn something, whether you're in graduate school, whether you're trying to pick up a professional skill, a hobby skill, or whatever else. What kind of things might work for you? And I feel like I'm somewhat qualified to talk about this because I have a PhD and I teach for a living, not just at universities, but on YouTube. So clearly at some point I had to learn some things. So a few guidelines. One is, and this is something that Naval Ravikant talks about a lot, and that I've also been telling people for a long time, is read and repeat and learn the basics. It's much more important to understand the basics well than to try to spread yourself out too thin, learning all the details and all the advanced stuff. When I was studying for my PhD quals, my qualifying exams, after all my classwork was done and before I could start working on my dissertation, I had a reading list of 90-something books. And, you know, that's a lot to read in a year with classes to take and classes to teach and a dissertation prospectus to write. But regardless of how many of those titles I managed to read in a week, and as a frank confession, I did not manage to read all 90-something titles, I still made sure that every day I read two things at least once. One was I read the summary of the Old Norse grammar in An Introduction to Old Norse by E.V. Gordon. Now, this is the most basic stuff that you need to know about Old Norse grammar if you want to read Old Norse. Linguists are fond of slamming these elementary old school 20th century grammars of languages, but they really do teach in a very concise format everything that you really need to know to go forth and start reading. And so I thought, if I know all of this down cold, I truly know the language, regardless of how many extra details I might or might not be able to retain from here, there, or Jan. And since Old Norse language was one of my #1 focuses, I thought that made a lot of sense. The other one was, and I mean, I could have done pretty much any Old Norse text, but I did the one that mattered the most to me, which was I read Hofamál every day. Hofamál being the words of Odin, which is forthcoming in a new edition and translation by me, which is a pretty big moment for me, coming later this year. And so when I got to my quals, which there was a written component and an oral component on 2 different days, I found that even if I couldn't call to mind some particular detail that I wanted from some particular marginal area of my specialization, I knew the basics so down pat that my committee told me that I had given one of the best qualifying exam performances they'd seen in the department at the University of Wisconsin. Who knows? I mean, this is secondhand, or you're getting this secondhand. People reporting about praise for themselves is not particularly reliable, but you know, I took it happily to hear that, and I, to this day, retain everything that I learned from reading those texts again and again and again and again and again very well, and it comes up so much more than any of the most detailed, most nitty-gritty things that, after all, I know where to look up. So whatever it is that you do, find the basic information and know that cold. That is going to matter more, even at the PhD level, than the most marginal details. Now, another thing that I would say as far as learning goes is in choosing your sources. Of course, so often in any field of expertise, Old Norse studies being the obvious one that I can reach for here, the people who are in that field, the people who are experts in that field, evaluate each other, judge each other, have professional and personal opinions about each other, and that can color their attitude toward certain work, right? If I see at the library or in a journal 2 articles or 2 books, and one is written by someone who has always been kind to me, has given me opportunities, stood up for me, and the other one is written by someone who has been a jackass to me, obviously I'm going to be more inclined to pay attention to the person who's been kind to me. But it always remains possible that the person who is a jackass has struck gold somewhere or another, so it doesn't do to ignore the people that we know are jackasses. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that often the people who are kind don't have a certain edge, because I think that I think that anger is something that actually makes you less intelligent in a lot of ways, and I'm going to develop that a little bit more here in a moment. But we have to be willing to let those personal judgments aside. Now, they don't have to be let aside in every instance, right? If someone asks me, who should I study with, I'm definitely going to recommend the kind person, right? If someone says, who should we invite for this this public talk or something, I'm going to recommend the kind person, right? But we have to try to be objective in judging people's information and not just their personalities. Now, let me develop what I was saying about anger a little bit more. One thing that you can watch for and that I have found is pretty reliable is that the angriest people are seldom well informed, right? The angriest people are not going to teach you good information typically. If there is somebody who is just always ranting about enemies, about conspiracies, about everything that went wrong in his or her life or in the course of history or whatever, that person is so invested in that anger that I severely doubt that that person is as informed about the subject as he or she ought to be. Now, that's not to say that we all don't have anger. That's not to say that I've lived such a milquetoast existence that I don't have enemies, right? I have enemies. How about the guy who tried to ruin my life at UCLA? How about the guy who killed my best friend, right? But I'm not sitting around thinking about them all the time. Now, I can sit around and start thinking about people like that all the time and lose myself to anger, which does nothing, right? I'm not pretending to some high level of enlightenment here, but the fact is, at a certain point, you realize that your anger is utterly unconstructive, and that life takes its turns, and you try to prevent being screwed over, but every now and then you just are. And I think that a mark of maturity is to be able to move past that that being screwed over without becoming consumed with it. So often the people who are consumed with this narrative that they've been screwed over really haven't been screwed over that bad. It's a matter of their pride being injured or something. Have they earned that anger, I would ask? I would say often they haven't. Consider the people like Holocaust survivors, someone like Elie Wiesel, right, who endured things worse than 99.99% of us will ever endure, and yet didn't go forward in anger. I think that is the mark of a mature mind and someone that you can truly learn from. I'm going to close this down then with my usual wish to all of you from beautiful Wyoming that you do well and remain happy and learn what you love and love what you learn, and figure out some way to do something good with it for yourself and maybe for the rest of the world too. From beautiful Wyoming, I'm wishing you all the best.